All right, so here we are looking at section three, Sumerian achievements. Now, before we kind of get into section three, let's just kind of remind ourselves the big picture and the most important things from chapter three so far. So, if we actually go back really quickly to section one and kind of scan that over, right, it talks up here at the top in these pictures about river valley civilizations. And so, this first, right, they live by a river that floods, and that flooding brings silt, which is really good and useful. But flooding is destructive. So what do? They irrigate. So you can see the city up here has changed in this picture, and now it's protected by a canal and waterways, and they've got storage facilities for water. And then this actually leads to a surplus of food, right? Which means that it's so efficient. Not everybody has to become a farmer now. So what happens? Division of labor. People go get different jobs because the farmers are going to want to trade or sell their grains, right, for either money or trade it for goods. So this person here is right being a clay potter, so that he makes as many pots as he can, and then he'll trade that for the food that he needs. And then the last thing is to make trade simple, right? We have appearance of cities. So that's section one, right? And here you can see river valley civilizations. In the ancient world, like we're going to come into Egypt next quarter, it's a river valley civilization, and it's the same process, right? The Nile floods, they irrigate it, they get a surplus of food, division of labor, appearance of cities. If you look on the next page, China, floods, right? Irrigation, so on and so forth. Indus River Valley civilizations, it's the same. Rome, river runs through that place. Section two, we talked about the rise of Sumer. So eventually these city states become a thing, right? So in the ancient world, they don't really have this concept of a country yet. It's a city state, which means it would be like the city and then all the farmland around it. And then eventually you get to an empire, right? There's your keyword over here, where Sargon realizes that a professional army, he can conquer neighboring city states, and he builds an empire. And then the big thing, other big takeaway here is, of course, that social hierarchy where everything is kind of, put together in this social order where of course you have the emperor at the top, and then kings, and then priests. You've got your merchants, artisans, craft people, farmers, and slaves, right? From order to most respect and to the least in a society. And then men and women in Sumer, it's important to remember in the ancient world, most times they're male dominated societies. Women don't have a lot of rights in the ancient world. And so just important to remember, those are the kind of the big highlights. So section three, Sumerian achievements. So what you will learn, so main ideas, the Sumerians invented the world's first writing system. That's a big deal. Advances and inventions changed Sumerian lives, and then many types of art developed in Sumer. So those are the big pictures, right? And the big idea is Sumerians made many advances that helped their society develop. Here's your key terms. You should know what all of these mean. You can look them up in the text. Cuneiform, that's your first form of writing. A pictograph, think of it almost like an emoji. It's a picture that represents something, right? Pretty obvious. Pictograph, heart. What does that represent? Love. That's almost getting to be more symbolic. Pictographs often are quite literal, right? The sun means the sun. A picture of a fish means a fish. A picture of wheat means wheat. A scribe is someone who writes, can read and write for a living. In the ancient world, they did not have school. You're extremely fortunate to be able to get an education. In the ancient world, that was available only to a very small number of people. And so scribes typically became very powerful because they had this mysterious skill of being able to read and write. An epic is a long poem or story. Architecture is the science of design and art of designing buildings. And a ziggurat is the most famous of the Sumerian buildings. So, if you were there, you are a student at a school for scribes in Sumer. Learning all the symbols for writing is very hard. Your teacher assigns you lessons to write on your clay tablet, but you can't help making mistakes. Then you have to smooth out the surface and try again. Still, being a scribe can lead to important jobs for the king. You could make your family proud. Why would you want to be a scribe? So, why would people be scribes? Well, you can gain wealth, you can gain respect, You can work for the king, which gives you access to powerful people, and that's why people would want to be a scribe. Building background. Sumerian society was advanced in terms of religion and government organization. The Sumerians were responsible for many other achievements which were passed down to later civilizations. All right, now, the invention of writing. This is far and away, next to farming, the most important invention in all of human history. Right? The concept that we could write things down and that they would be there forever, and so that we could pass it along to future generations. The Sumerians made one of the greatest cultural advances in history. They developed cuneiform, the world's first system of writing. But Sumerians did not have pencils, pens, or paper. Instead, they used sharp tools called styluses to make wedge-shaped symbols on clay tablets. So, big ideas here, right? Cuneiform is the first system of writing. And then what did they use to write with in Sumer? Right? If you didn't find it, there it is. They wrote on clay tablets with a special tool called a stylus. How do you erase? You just pat the clay back. Now, how do they make sure when they're done? Like, how do they complete their final draft? They leave it in the sun to dry. So, development of writing, if you look up here at these pictures, you can see, like I said, these very early ones are very kind of literal, right? Where eventually they form into something that's more of a symbol. So grain, this is what grain looks like. Later on, though, this kind of becomes a symbol, right? Fish, that's kind of what a fish looks like. Later on, fish evolves to these things. So, and here you can see a cuneiform tablet. Sumerian writing developed from early symbols called pictographs. Writers used clay tablets to record business deals, like this tablet that describes a number of sheep and goats. All right, so earlier written communication had used pictographs or picture symbols. Each pictograph represented an object, such as a tree or an animal. But in cuneiform, symbols could also represent syllables or basic parts of words. As a result, Sumerian writers could combine symbols to express more complex ideas such as joy or powerful. Sumerians first used cuneiform to keep business records. A scribe or writer would be hired to keep track of the items people traded. Government officials and temples also hired scribes to keep their records. Becoming a scribe was a way to move up in the social class. Sumerian students went to school to learn to read and write, but like today, some students did not want to study. The Sumerian story tells of a father who urged his son to do his schoolwork. Go to school, stand before your school father, recite your assignment, open your school bag, write your tablet. After you've finished your assignment and reported to your monitor, come to me and do not wander about in the street. Sumerian essay quoted in History Begins at Sumer by Samuel Noah Kramer. In time, Sumerians put their writing skills to new uses. They wrote works on history, law, grammar, and math. They also created works of literature. Sumerians wrote stories, proverbs, and songs. They wrote poems about the gods and about military victories. Some of these were epics, long poems that tell the story of heroes. Later, people used some of these poems to create the Epic of Gilgamesh, the story of a legendary Sumerian king. So, reading check. How was cuneiform first used in Sumer? So if you kind of go back and scan over, how did they use it? They basically used it for many different ways. What are some ways that cuneiform was first used in Sumer? Right, so answers, they used it to keep records, right? Like keep track of trades, things like that. They also used it for history, law. We're going to talk about Hammurabi's Code, math, literature, stories, proverbs, songs. They used it in a lot of different ways. All right, advances in inventions. So writing is the big one. What is the most important thing the Sumerians came up with? Writing. And they came up with calendar, the wheel. They came up with a lot of important stuff, but writing was the big one. So writing was not the only great Sumerian invention. These early people made many other advances and discoveries. Technical advances. One of the Sumerians' most important developments was the wheel. They were the first people to build wheeled vehicles, including carts and wagons. Using the wheel, Sumerians invented a device that spins clay as a craftsperson shapes it into bowls. This device is called a potter's wheel, which is still used today, right? When you look at these wheeled vehicles, we use that all the time. Sumerians were the first one to come up with the wheel. The plow was another important Sumerian invention. Pulled by oxen, plows broke through the hard clay soil of Sumer to prepare it for planting. This technique greatly increased farm production. The Sumerians also invented a clock that used falling water to measure time. Sumerian advances improved daily life in many ways. Sumerians built sewers under city streets. They learned to use bronze to make stronger tools and weapons. They even produced makeup and glass jewelry. So there's a lot that's going on with these technical advances. Sewer might not seem like a big deal, but man, it's a huge deal. We'll talk a lot about it when we get to Rome. But what does a sewer do? If you don't know, look it up, but it's pretty important. Math and science. Another area in which Sumerians excelled was math. In fact, they developed a math system based on the number 60. Based on this system, they divided a circle into 360 degrees. Dividing a year into 12 months, a factor of 60, was another Sumerian idea. Sumerians also calculated the areas of rectangles and triangles. Sumerian scholars studied science too. They wrote long lists to record their study of the natural world. These tablets included the names of thousands of animals, plants, and minerals. The Sumerians also made advances in medicine. They used ingredients from animals, plants, and minerals to produce healing drugs. Items used in these medicines included milk, turtle shells, figs, and salt. The Sumerians even cataloged their medical knowledge, listing treatments according to symptoms and body parts. So, a lot going on here. So, what areas of life were improved by Sumerian inventions? So, I want you to just kind of think about what is something they invented and how did that improve their lives? You got a lot of choices here. Wheel, right, allows them to do things like create carts and wagons, move stuff around, used it to make pottery. The plow allowed them to grow more food, right? Sewer keeps their cities clean. Bronze weapons allow them to defend themselves. Math, science, and a lot of this gets back to writing still, right? Because they can pass on medical knowledge. There's a lot of stuff going on here. All right, moving on here. The arts of Sumer. So up at the top, you can see some of the stuff they created. String musical instrument. It's called I think it's a lyre. I don't know. It features a cow's head and made of silver decorated with shell and stone. Pretty fancy. This cylinder seal is like the world's first copy machine. And it's essentially the same way a copy machine still works. You take this wheel, you spin it over some or roll it over some clay. It leaves behind this impression. And so this is a big deal that they learned to make art on this seal and they could just repeat it over and over. It's like a copy machine. So the arts of Sumer. The Sumerian skills in the field of art, metalwork, and architecture, the science of building, are well known to us. The ruins of great buildings and fine works of art have provided us wonderful examples of the Sumerians' creativity. Architecture. So, the science of building. Most Sumerian rulers lived in large palaces. Other rich Sumerians had two-story homes with as many as a dozen rooms. Most people, however, lived in smaller one-story houses. These homes had 6 or 7 rooms arranged around a small courtyard. Large and small houses stood side by side along the narrow, unpaved streets of the city. Bricks made of mud were the house's main building blocks. City centers were dominated by their temples, the largest and most impressive buildings in Sumer. A ziggurat, a pyramid-shaped temple tower, rose above each city. Outdoor staircases led to a platform and a shrine at the top. Some architects added columns to make the temples more attractive. So they're designing stuff for a purpose. Now, why would they make the temple the nicest building in the city? It's because they believed their gods wanted to be worshipped and pleased, right? If they didn't please the gods, Sumerian gods were very angry and vengeful and not so great. There's a famous story where a Sumerian city-state was having a party and it was late and it kept the god awake. And so they tell the story of the god destroyed the city-state in a flood because they were being too loud. So Sumerian gods are very angry and vengeful because they want to be pleased and worshipped. And a picture of a ziggurat is actually right here, where you can see this amazing mud brick building, right? Super cool looking and very complex. All right, the arts. Sumerian sculptors produced many fine works. Among them are the statues of gods created for temples. Sumerian artists also sculpted small objects out of ivory and rare woods. Sumerian pottery is known more for its quantity than quality. Potters turned out many items, but few were works of beauty. Jewelry was a popular item in Sumer. The jewelers of the region made many beautiful works out of imported gold, silver, and gems. Earrings and other items found in the region show that Sumerian jewelers knew advanced methods for putting gold pieces together. Cylinder seals are perhaps Sumer's most famous works of art. Right? That's what I talked about earlier. These small objects were stone cylinders engraved with designs. When rolled over clay, the designs would leave behind their imprint. Each seal left its own distinct imprint. As a result, a person could show ownership of a container by rolling a cylinder over the container's wet clay surface. People also used cylinder seals to sign documents or to decorate other clay objects. Some seals showed battle scenes. Others displayed worship rituals. Some were highly decorative with hundreds of carefully cut gems. They required great skill to make. The Sumerians also enjoyed music. Kings and temples hired musicians to play on special occasions. Sumerian musicians played reed pipes, drums, and tambourines, and string instruments called lyres or lyres. Children learned songs in school. People sang hymns to gods and kings. Music and dance provided entertainment in marketplaces and homes. Now, I do want to talk about this. Children did not learn songs in schools. Most children were working. Okay, children of very wealthy and powerful people went to school. Most Sumerian kids did not go to school. So just want to point that part out. So, okay, reviewing ideas, terms, and people. So let's talk about these questions. So what is cuneiform? So just remind you, right? It's got wedge-shaped symbols. Okay, it's a system. They used it for law, for storytelling, right? Keep track of business trades. So what is it? Right, it's a system of writing, absolutely. Okay, now this one, I'm not going to have you answer the question, but I'm just going to point out that a why do you think? There's no wrong answer as long as you explain your thinking. So why do you think writing is one of history's most important cultural advances? So just kind of take a second, and I actually am going to have you answer, but there's no right or wrong answer. Why is writing important? Okay, C, we're going to skip for this one just because what current leader would you choose to write an epic about doesn't really have to do with Sumerians. Okay, so recall, what were two early uses of the wheel? So if you don't know the answer, what you'd want to do is in the text, go back and find the answer. So I'm going to go back to that part where they talked about the wheel. Okay, so there's the answer. It's in there somewhere. What were two early uses of the wheel? Right, one was making carts and wagons. The other one was a potter's wheel, which allows you to spin pottery much easier. All right, so there's that answer. All right, now, why do you think the invention of the plow was so important to the Sumerians? I'm not going to make you answer this one because it's pretty easy. It's a why do you think? And I don't know why they asked why do you think, because they actually tell you the answer. So why was the plow so important? Well, let me go back to the text and show you. Okay. It increases farm production. All right. It's not a why do you think. There is an answer. They can grow more food. It makes farming easier and more efficient is the fancy way to say that. All right. Going back to the questions here. What was the basic Sumerian building material? So for this one, what are the Sumerians using to build these ziggurats? So if I go back, I'm going to try to scan for what section is about building. It's on this page somewhere. Architecture, right? The science of building. So let me kind of scan this over. What is the main building block of the Sumerians? Mud brick, right? So that's a little bit about ancient Sumer and their advances. They made a ton of them. And so the last question, just want you to write down, what is one thing that you learned, okay, about Sumerian advances? That's it for section 3. We're getting close to wrapping up Mesopotamia. I hope this was helpful.